Okay, next we're going to continue on with our frames. Here we're going to use Frame to PSD. And for me, I'm simply right-clicking on the frame and opening in Photoshop. If you're already in Photoshop, you can open up this same frame by going to the menu bar, File, Open, and navigate to where the frame folder is. Here we see we have two layers, layer 1 and the background layer. Once again, I've gone through these images and placed this image on a layer by itself. Place it on a layer by itself, which is absolutely fine with me. Okay, I'm going to zoom in by holding down the Control key and tapping the plus sign on the keyboard. It zooms us in, or I can grab my navigator to navigate around and look at the corners, or I can simply hold down the space bar and get the grab hand and move around in my image. We're using this image for two reasons. It's on an angle. The other image was pretty much straight on square to the viewer. And here we see we have rounded corners. In Photoshop and Smart Objects, we can't have a rounded corner, so we have to do another little special step to get a rounded corner. Also, if you're using Photoshop CS3 and below, you can't get Photoshop CS3 and below won't allow for warping of a smart object. It'll allow you to skew it, rotate it, and resize it, but you can't warp it. And pretty much what we're doing in Photoshop CS5 and above is we have the ability to warp a smart object. So here I'm kind of going to do it for CS3 and CS5. First, we start by getting our rectangle marquee or pressing the M key. Make sure we have the dotted square. And here I'm just going to draw out a landscape rectangle that seems to be correct size for me. And see here, I almost made a mistake. Remember, in this particular example, we want rounded corners. We don't want the square corners. So let's go to select and deselect. Yes, I sometimes, when I get to talking, I forget what the heck I'm doing also sometimes. So here we want rounded corner rectangle tool. So if you notice in your toolbar, there's a rounded rectangle tool, and the shortcut key is U. To make sure that you're getting that rounded rectangle tool, locate that rectangle tool button, hold down the left mouse button, and make sure we're selecting rounded rectangle tool. And on our toolbar, when we select that rounded rectangle tool, notice there's an option here. We want path. Make sure you select path. And in my radius, that's how round the corner is, I have 20 pixels round. I'm not sure if it's correct. We might need 10 or 15, but here I'm going to try 20. So here I'm going to draw out a rectangle using my rounded rectangle tool. And if you notice there, here let's zoom in. If we notice here on the corners of that rounded rectangle tool, we have a rounded corner. That's what we're trying to get. Control 0 to go back out. Now with the rounded rectangle tool and selecting pass, we just get this line that represents our rounded rectangle tool. So now I need to convert this to a marquee or selection. So what I do is right click, and from the pop out I select make selection. I want my selection feathered radius to 0 and click OK. So there we get a rectangle. Next, I want to create a new layer. I'm going to fill it. It doesn't matter if it's foreground or background color. For me, my foreground is blue, my background is white. I'm going to fill it with foreground by holding down the Alt key and tapping the Delete key. Now I want to get rid of my selection by doing a Control D. And I want to copy this particular layer. I can copy this layer by doing a Control and J. And there we see we have a layer called layer 2 copy, and we have layer 2. My layer 2 copy, I'm going to rename that to image. And my layer 2 copy, and my layer 2, I'm going to call that shape. Okay. I'm going to go to the visibility of my image layer, and I'm going to click the eye to hide it because I don't want that in my way. Now I'm on my shape layer. The reason we need a shape layer is because we need the shape layer to take on the shape of that picture with the rounded corners. So here we're going to do a free edit by going Control and T and holding down the Control key. We're going to grab the corner, our first corner, it doesn't matter which one you start with, and we're simply going to move those corners and overlap the corner that's there in the image. Move that corner and overlap. Move that corner and overlap. And to ensure that we're overlapping, what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key, tap the plus sign, because I want to zoom in on those corners and see we got to do a little adjustments here. So holding down Control, and I'm making sure that I'm overlapping. Make sure you're overlapping that image completely. Make sure you're overlapping that image completely. And go over to the next corner. And make sure I'm overlapping. And down in the left corner, make sure I'm overlapping. Okay. Also, to ensure that you overlap, you can hide those bounding boxes of the placeholder there by doing a Control and H. Okay, that looks pretty good. Do Control H again to bring them back. Now you can either commit by clicking the commit on the toolbar, double clicking, or pressing enter. Okay, perfect. We have our shape layer there. Control 0. Next, we want to go to our image layer. Let's click the eye to show our particular layer. Let's right click the layer, convert it to a smart object. Okay. Now we've converted our layer to a smart object. Now we need to resize and rotate our image layer. So free edit, transform, Control T, hold down the Shift key. Remember, whenever you're making a size change, you always want to hold down that Shift key and make sure you're holding down Shift. Next, I'm going to rotate the image, and you'll notice when my cursor is in the corner for me to make a change, you get this double split arrow, one pointing in one direction, the other pointing in the opposite direction. But if I move my cursor out from there, I get this different looking little cursor where it's a curved line with two arrows. That allows me to rotate my image. So here I'm just rotating my image just a little bit here to match the rotation of the frame there. Holding down Shift, and I gotta make sure that I overlap the frame that's there with my image. Overlap. Okay, it looks perfect to me. Now I can click commit on the toolbar, double click, or I can just simply press enter. So now we have our smart object and we have our shape layer that's here. Smart object, shape layer, smart object, shape layer. Now we need our smart object to take on the shape of our shape layer by first making sure we're on our smart object, and we're going to hold down the Control, the Alt, and tap the G key. And now we see that there's a little arrow on our smart object layer. And that smart object layer with that little arrow that indicates that our image layer has now been clipped down into our shape layer. And if you look at your shape layer, you see that we have our rounded corners. Now also, I want to put in a little inner drop shadow on our frame. So on my shape layer, I'm going to double click in the blue area, select inner shadow. And the neat thing about your inner shadow, you can come right over to your image and you can grab this inner shadow. You see the controls change. And I just want a little bit of that drop shadow to pop out. And I'm going to change the size of it. Changing the size of it makes that drop shadow softer. So kind of like that. Click OK. So now I want to place my image in my smart object. I locate and double click my smart object icon. And if you notice here, in our corners, we don't have a rounded corner. We have a rounded corner for the blue part of our image, but if you notice, there is white peeking out in the corner, indicating that we will not get a rounded corner. So now to place my image, I go File on the menu bar, Place. Here I'm going to place a picture of my granddaughter once again, holding down the Shift key, dragging only a corner, holding down the Shift key, dragging only a corner to fill up my placeholder there. Double click, close, and yes. And there we have our Nana placed in her frame. We see our little inner drop shadow there. And when we zoom in, we notice that we have rounded corners. So that's how you get a rounded corner in Photoshop. CS3, 4, 5, I believe even 6. Those are the steps that you must follow in order to get a rounded corner. We can also do like we did in the previous step, to where we did a reflection. Here I'm going to hold down the Control key and click each one of my layers to select all 3 layers. From the keyboard, I'm holding down the Control key, tapping the G key, and we see that all our images were grouped into one grouping. And basically what a group is, it's a folder that contains all the layers for your image. So here I click the drop down arrow to expand the contents of the folder, and we see there we have all of our layers within that one folder group. Here I'm going to create a copy of it by grabbing it, dragging it down to create new layer. And here I have group 1 copy and I have group 1. I'm going to get my move tool, and here we see I can move that entire group. So we've actually duplicated that one grouping of the entire grouping. Here, like we did before, we're going to flip this so we can get a reflection. So from the menu bar, select Edit, Transform, and I'm going to flip vertically. Okay, so I know it looks kind of weird because it flipped it, but we got the right orientation. It's upside down. So now we just have to do some rotation. So from the menu bar, I'm going to select Edit, Transform, and Rotate. And here I rotate it. And what I'm going to do too is to bring it down, because I want to kind of match up at the bottom. So kind of match that line going straight across at the bottom. Okay, we might be able to get it exactly, but if not, you just play around with going back and forth. And if I look up here on, this is what our rotation indicates we're at 19.3 degrees, which that's absolutely fine for me. I'm just making sure that my frame looks pretty good. It's straight at the bottom. It's straight going down the side. Well, we got one side that's straight. The other side I'm not too much concerned about. Once again, we can commit by clicking the check mark. And here we're going to bring down the opacity of that particular group by going to the opacity slider for that particular layer grouping. And we're going to bring down the opacity. Go about 27%. That looks pretty good to me. So there we've created Smart Object with a shape layer to take on the shape of the rounded corners. We completed creating a grouping, duplicating that grouping, then flipped that grouping vertically and brought down the opacity, and we also rotated the grouping. All right.